Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our Navigating Global Waters, the Essentials of International Portability. We're excited to explore the complexities of professional registrations and portability across borders with you. And in today's webinar, we're going to cover how job roles differ internationally and the implications for career mobility. We're going to delve into certification standards, educational requirements, and the importance of professional credibility. Additionally, we're going to examine the differences between the U.S. And international occupational standards, focusing on continuing education and practical endorsements. Today's learning objectives, we're going to learn a few things, understanding professional registrations and portability across borders, including variations in job roles and standards, recognizing differences in occupational standards, in particular continuing education and practical endorsements, and then lastly, gaining insights and strategies for pursuing careers globally. Just a few housekeeping measures. Make sure you use your question and answer feature or Q&A feature on the webinar for questions you may have, and we'll answer those at the end of the webinar. My name is Francis Narek. I'm the current president of the Coalition for the Registration of Exercise Professionals, and I'm going to be facilitating the discussions today. And so we're going to have our esteemed panelists describe who they are, and we'll go from there. We'll start with Graham Melstrand.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Graham Melstrand, the Executive Vice President of Community Health and Wellness for the American Council on Exercise and the immediate past president of CREP and past president of the Physical Activity Alliance as well.
Dr. Biagioli.
Thanks for having me. A couple of hats that I wear. I'm the graduate program director in applied physiology at the University of Miami. I am currently the vice president for CREP. I'm the past chair for ICREPS, which is the International Confederation for the Registration of Exercise Professionals.
Great. Dr. Tom Richards.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Tom Richards. I'm the executive director for the International Confederation of Registers for Exercise Professionals, also known as ICREPS. Great to be here.
Last but not least, Greg Knockleby.
Hi, I'm Greg Knockleby. Thank you so much.
Great. So I guess going around the group, we're going to be doing like more of a panel discussion. We're going to talk about key takeaways you'd like for folks to leave with. Graham, Brian, Tom, and Greg, what do you think some key things you'd like for folks to know?
I'll take the first cut at it. A lot of people have been kind of functioning in silos, and so I think part of the goal of this webinar is to help people understand that there's been a lot of work done in collaboration with different countries to allow for portability between job roles that exist in both countries.
Great.
Yeah. I think a great takeaway would be just to understand where to look for the information when you're considering a career overseas in another country, where are the resources, who to turn to.
Sure, and I think the piece that I would add is that not just in the exercise professional job roles, but in all professions and occupations, there's historically been some challenges for people looking to bring their formal education and credentialing with them as they move from one country to another. And in some cases, individuals have had to completely duplicate their previous efforts and pursue education and credentialing because there weren't agreements or cooperation between countries. And within the exercise professional space, there's been a lot of work done to understand how the education and credentialing landscape works, what the job roles are, and help professionals avoid redundant work and allow them to practice their craft really in some cases, as soon as they arrive in a new country.
Correct.
Yeah, I would say, I agree with all of you, but I honestly, at the end of the day, I'm hoping that you're able to activate your membership with your organizations and, be active with US reps who's providing you with these opportunities. In addition to that, making sure that your paperwork is ready. and your networks. So without your network, your colleagues, especially those international ones, it's going to be tougher to work overseas.
Great. I think one place we can start for our audience is really like having a good understanding of what does international portability mean. And so maybe let's start there. So how do you define the concept of global standards in context of occupational credentialing, and what are the key elements that should be considered? I'm thinking maybe Brian, if you want to start talking about from the perspective of the global matrix, the work that IC Reps has done, and certainly if maybe the dialogue between you and Tom could maybe start us off.
Sure. So depending on how the country functions in its development for within the workforce, there's generally either a occupational standard created from a role delineation study that's usually done at the government level, or if like in the US, the organizations are the ones that are supporting it, it's a job task analysis. And so in the global matrix, there's a collective of different countries who have engaged in this both at the government level and at the not-for-profit organizational level. And those things will create the knowledge and task aspects that are necessary for a particular role. To establish this from a portability perspective, we have to map those knowledge and tasks across the different countries. So for instance, if you're a personal trainer in the United States and you're registered with US Reps, you have the ability to port into Australia and enter their registration, but they have a couple of additional components that are required at the government level before you enter. In other cases, you might be able to seamlessly move from, let's say, the United States Register of Exercise Professionals into the Canadian rep system. So every single country has slight nuances, but the foundation of the standards by which the role is defined is all going to be consistent because that all has collectively been mapped to a unified aspect of knowledge and skill.
Francis, if I may, I would just add to that, that thanks to all the great work of several folks from IC Reps and the IC Reps members who have mapped their standards to a global standard, there's a portability matrix on the IC Reps website that's free for anyone. So if they're in the United States and they're wondering, do they have a portable credential to Australia or New Zealand or whatever country it might be, if they're in part of our confederation, they can see exactly how they map. And in some cases, it might be they just need to add a CPR or AED, but most likely they already have that in the US, or maybe a practical component. But we make the portability matrix makes it very clear what needs to happen to be portable.
Yeah, and if I can add one thing,
please.
when people transfer, we try to make it as seamless as possible into the entering country. So you'll know exactly what you need to do as soon as you get there, and there's often solutions that are provided for you, so it can be as quick and efficient as possible.
So when we're thinking about job roles that require kind of higher levels of education, and I'm thinking about like maybe jobs like clinical exercise physiology or strength and conditioning, where they require, at least in the stateside, is education in combination with certifications. How does that work? And I think I'm going to maybe pose that to Graham, and kind of what are those kind of efforts underway now?
Sure. And there's a couple of really high level ones, including one with support and encouragement from the World Health Organization. And that's under what's called a World Active umbrella that brings all of the registry organizations together. And the goal on that is to understand where every country is in their journey to establishing a professional set of occupational roles for exercise professionals, whether it's in the clinical setting, as you've described, sports performance, or health and fitness. And it's important to understand that that every country is in a different place in their progression, if you will, on this. So there are countries that haven't yet established either a governmental or an NGO model, and so we're aggregating through survey data what the landscape is in each country and identifying the best practices and the difference between countries. One of the things that's really important to understand is that in most of the rest of the world, that there are pretty distinct differences in terms of academic preparation that's either based on vocational education and training, a guild model where we're going to provide some formal education, some hands-on training. It's really a tell you, show you, we'll do it together until you've demonstrated a level of competency that allows you to go out on your own. And in professions, that'd be your formal academic preparation in college or university, followed by some type of more formal competency assessment. In the United States, we rely on a combination of vocational and academic preparation, but we have the competency-based exam that is part of your certification program, supported by a continuing education requirement and a disciplinary process. So here in the US, it is possible to kind of bypass some of that formal education and demonstrate your competency, but then you have to build that resume, if you will, with the practical training, internship experience, or workshops that are hands-on. So with the World Health Organization and World Active, their goal is to establish this roadmap and really give everybody an opportunity to identify where their country is and then to strive to those best practices over time.
Greg, do you have any other insights from thinking when we're thinking about the NSCA and their international affiliates? How does that work when, for like, say, for example, you wanted to go from Italy to Germany or Italy to Spain? How does that work?
Well, in the European system, it's a little bit easier, but when you're crossing to eastern borders, when you're going from China to Spain, all the way back to Japan, it's a little bit more challenging. One of the things that we've been doing is trying to influence, the gatekeepers for the ambassadors that would be ambassadors for the NSCA. And these ambassadors are foreign affiliations and chapters in every country to make it easier, because they're establishing that credential, that recognition. They've worked with all of the ministries. They're reaching and teaching all of the universities about the importance of strength and conditioning in their country. So, we've been trying to expand into every territory, major territory, so that the paperwork is seamless. But having an extra layer of US reps, for example, and that affiliation is also helpful. But it's not easy. It takes a little bit of time.
Great. And so let's go down a little bit. Let's go a little deeper, if you're okay with that. So we're going to talk about navigating certification standards internationally. So I think maybe we'll start with the question that we're kind of thinking about is, what are some key differences in certification standards and educational requirements that professionals should be aware of when they're working abroad? So maybe, Graham, do you want to start there? Kind of
Sure.
thinking about that.
Well, yeah, and it's kind of a build on what I shared earlier.
Yeah.
Outside of the US, to a large extent, they require or they rely on training providers that are running vocational schools that prepare people for careers primarily in personal training, but also in some of the other occupational roles. And that would be classroom training plus hands-on, and then they do an assessment at the end. And really what you're receiving and what allows you to go to work in most of Europe and the rest of the world is the diploma from that training provider. And in a lot of cases, those training providers, those vocational schools are aligned with or have relationships with US-based certification organizations. And so the certification is a culminating event that allows individuals outside of the US to earn that certification as kind of an additional capstone. It gives them a competitive advantage, perhaps, when compared to their peers without them. But it's usually not required. And continuing education is highly recommended, but there isn't a requirement in many countries to maintain registration on their national registries, where here in the US, in order to be registered as an exercise professional, you have to have that current credential from an accredited program. You have to manage and complete your continuing education, which maintains both current competence and helps you advance your skills. And then, of course, you're subject to a disciplinary process if you act outside of your scope or demonstrate poor character. So going out of the US, what they're really looking for is that certification plus degree, if you have one, But it's really that that practical endorsement that shows you've either got the documented work experience or you've had an internship experience or that hands-on skill set. And then coming into the U.S., the expectation is that people would earn one of the certifications from an accredited program as that capstone.
So Brian and Tom, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. When we're thinking about some of the international parts of kind of the education and certifications, and are certifications, like, I guess, common internationally as a kind of an independent assessment of competency? Are you seeing that as kind of like widely adopted internationally? And kind of explore that a little bit. And then how does registration kind of tie into that piece?
Tom, I'll start off and I'll just give a little background for everyone because sometimes there's a little bit of confusion as it relates to accreditation for an education program or from an awarding body versus accreditation for a certification program. The education accreditation ensures the outcome specific to the student. So the student is the stakeholder of that particular accreditation model. In the certification model, similar in the United States to in law, they're taking the bar or medical boards, those types of things. They've already had the education, and in some cases it might be a vocational education, in some cases it might be a collegiate education, but they're held to the same standard within certification, and then that qualifies you for registration. Whereas if you just went to school, there's no guarantee of your minimum competency specific to the knowledge and tasks that are outlined by the certification and underpinned by the Department of Labor. So that's why we take certification in the United States as your minimum competency qualification. Outside, there is awarding bodies which do education that looks at the curriculum components that the student is taught, and there should be some programmatic or student learning outcomes as the capstone end. And in some cases, it's a culminating experience, like what Graham said, where they demonstrate practical skills. Maybe there's some sort of assessment related to that. But again, it is a differentiation in who the actual stakeholder is relative to the accreditation.
Yeah, Tom, so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I think what we see internationally, that the U.S. certifications are exceptionally strong for certifications, where as Graham alluded to, overseas sometimes there's an additional practical component that's necessary to become registered in another country. So there's that extra layer. And what I would recommend to someone in the United States who's considering a transition overseas is to get as much experience as possible in the US, document that experience, work with different types of people, different ages, maybe different fitness levels. And as you're gathering certificates or modalities in the US, just make sure all that stuff is documented so that whatever country you have, you can make the transition as seamless as possible. Because like we said, the certification in the US is as strong as can be. Sometimes they just like to see that practical component because that's part of the history and how the industry developed in other countries.
Yeah, and there's an important add-on to that, and Greg touched upon it before, is the organizations are responsible for the registration system. So we collectively aggregate our data on who is currently certified, who met the continuing professional development or continuing education requirements to renew. But if you go on to US Reps and you look in the upper right corner, you'll see registry. If you click on that and open it up, you'll see that the individuals will show a certification, and then there's another drop down next to it that says that they've done the practical or have portability. And the organizations are responsible for reporting who has gone through the practical coursework. So if an individual never reports that they've gone through additional training and practical assessment, then the organization doesn't know. So it would show up that they actually are not fully portable to all of the countries. They might have a limitation. So for instance, the NCSF, we have college programs. They go through the college programs and they have to complete the labs and the different aspects that are associated with certification outcomes through the university. So when you do that, it's automatic. In other cases, we have vocationally trained individuals who get the personal trainer, and then they'll go to a workshop and do the practical components there. And the assessment-based models are consistent, so then they would also be portable. But if someone just went and took a certification exam without having the practical endorsement, they would not be 100% portable to the different countries.
So I'd love to hear from you, Greg, on
Mhm.
kind of the international registration. I think there's parts of it where there's certain like the health fitness certifications are on one register, and then also you have strength conditioning on another different register, which is on the sports side. Kind of walk us through kind of how that works when you're talking about like the transferring from register to register.
Well, does it work? I'm not really sure if it does necessarily. It just really depends. I just wanted to, echo a little bit of what, all of you have been contributing. And, if I may, it's just one of those things where your specialty or your occupation may have a different role and priority in that different country's health and education system. And even though you may drop down and look and see what your role is on US reps and so forth, make sure you are prepared to change that terminology, because that terminology may not exist. Strength and conditioning, for example, it doesn't exactly translate in one country versus another. And in some cases, it's just the initialism S&C for strength and conditioning. But learn the differences between the certificates versus license and authorizations. Yes, degrees and diplomas are fundamental as checklist items, but it's more than that. Like Tom had alluded to, it's the relationships and referrals and the network basically that supports you to add that additional layer of credibility. But honestly, Francis, to answer your question, we endeavor to have a registry of strength and conditioning professionals from the NSCA and include other groups. And being part of US reps is also very helpful to make those connections. Currently, registries are by country. They are not, I know that the EU is working on its own registry as a collective, under their countries, but it really does depends on the country itself. But at the end of the day, it's about the employer and what they're looking for.
So Tom, can you talk about how the registers work? I think with IC reps, who's involved, and can someone be on multiple registers simultaneously? I guess I wanted to ask you that question.
So the registered, each country in IC reps, for example, there's 13 different countries, and each country is responsible for their own register and deciding who can be on that register. Where the IC reps function is mapping up the different registers to each other. So each country has autonomy based on the history of the profession and sort of the development of the professionals in that particular country. But then at IC reps, each register is mapped to a global standard, which allows for that portability. I'm actually going to defer to Brian on the question of, can someone be on two different registers at one time? Because I know Brian has helped develop registers.
Yeah,
Brian,
it's let me start off by no system's a perfect system, but this one is a pretty good one. In the US, for instance, if you're going to be on the United States Register for Exercise Professionals, you have to live in the United States. So even though all of our respective organizations do international credentialing, if, for instance, you're with the NSCA and you're in Germany, you may get the CSCS credential, but you would not be on the United States Register because you're not practicing in the US. So the way that the register systems ideally work is if the individual is practicing within that country, that's the registration system that they're in. Now, there is a possibility for someone to be on two registers at one time. Not that there's anything really wrong with that, but the way that that would work is an individual went to another country, provided all their documentation for registration, but didn't tell the United States registry system that they moved. And so the organization would not necessarily have that data in their system because the APIs work on a daily basis. So if you kept your US address, you would still be on the US register, even though you might be working and registered in Australia. In either case, looking at that possibility, the person's still qualified to work in both. So, it's kind of a no harm, no foul. But essentially, when an individual on US reps asks for portability, when they move into the new country, they won't be on US reps anymore. They'll be in the new country's registration system.
And one of the things that we haven't spent any time talking about yet is obviously the goal of all of the registration systems are to ensure quality and protection for consumers and access to a reliable workforce for employers, and of course to help establish the confidence for referring professionals within each country's health systems. But the other element on this is really one around trust, and being able to positively verify that people have the education and credentials that they say they do. And part of the mobility that we see from country to country isn't just individuals that are moving within Europe or within the Commonwealth system, which was one of the I guess the originators of national registers for exercise professionals. But it also creates upward mobility. So people that are coming from countries in Asia or Eastern Europe, they'll earn their credentials and certifications in fitness, and then look for opportunities to move to those countries that have higher incomes, higher standards of living, and things. And there are elements, and we've all experienced them here domestically in the U.S., where people are as good with Photoshop and maybe better than with their skills. So being able to positively verify those credentials and to respond between the registers to say, yes, this person does have that personal trainer, exercise physiologist, strength and conditioning coach credential, and they are qualified to work, subject to any additional requirements that you have, adds to the reliability and the confidence in our profession.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Graham. And that's what's great about the U.S. rep system is you have an individual who may not be complying with continuing education and professional development. And they may have been certified, they may have been on the register, but as soon as they don't complete the required continued education and their certification expires, they literally fall off the registration system. So, it's important and helpful to let certificants know that there is a responsibility within the scope of your profession to do continued professional development, continued education to maintain your minimum competency, and that's how you maintain your registration.
So I want to explore that a little bit, and I'm going to open this up to all four of you. I think it's curious. I think I just wanted to kind of highlight that. I think, Graham, in one of your points was continuing education is sometimes recommended but not required. In certain countries it's required and some others are not. I guess I'd like to be able to explore that a little bit. It's like, what is the purpose of continuing education or continuing professional development? I've seen also CPDs. What is that particular purpose of it, being time bound, and explore a little bit about kind of like the rationale why it's there. I don't know who wants to handle that one.
Oh, I can start a little bit. It just depends on the country, and where you want to work. Basically, let's say that and we can see these differences when we compare to our US system. So in China, if you want to find a job immediately, it'll take little effort, little continuing education to actually qualify for that particular job. And it comes very simply to you. Whereas in the US, it kind of takes a little bit more to not only return to standards or sustain your standards or sustain your certification. We definitely highlight on that because we're very competitive in the marketplace. So I think it just depends on which country you're applying to, as far as what those continuing education requirements are. Some it might be easier, some it might be a little bit more challenging, and some may just say once you're a black belt, you're still a black belt. So
yeah, and Greg, that's a really good point, because that's the difference also between an education diploma and an actual certification. So if you're in a different country and you attain a qualification from a training provider, which would be a certificate or a diploma, you're basically educated for life, right? They're not requiring any continued education to maintain that. Now, if you enter into the registration system is going to require that you do that, because they're the one putting the stamp on your minimum competency. And in the US, we also have domain specificity. So when we do our job task analysis and we define our knowledge and tasks, those are the areas that you have to maintain, right? Because you're saying, as a professional, these are the things I know, and these are the things I know how to do. So within the domains, that's where our continued education is recognized. And so if you're a personal trainer, but you go take a massage class, that doesn't necessarily fall under the scope of a personal trainer, so it wouldn't qualify. Whereas if you went and did a modality specific class like the TRX or something along those lines, guidelines. Well, yeah, that falls under training instruction, so it makes a lot of sense. In this way, it establishes a defined scope for each of the professional roles and allows us to identify what is necessary to maintain minimum competency. And along with mapping with across all four of these organizations with a 97% consistency, we'll also see that we have this categorically have the same domain. So the scope is consistent, the competency requirements are consistent, and the continued professional development by hours is consistent.
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple important things there that are a build on this. And Greg, I love the martial arts comparison on that, because if you rest on your laurels as a martial artist with that black belt and things like that, and you're competitive, you're going to be doing some losing at some point if you don't continue to enhance your skills. And our exercise professional job roles are evolving over time. They're becoming more sophisticated, and the science is evolving too. So it's really important, just like it would be in medicine or technology, that we maintain that current competency. And remember, when you earn your certification, you've demonstrated what's called minimum competency. So you're good enough to do the job without supervision, for the protection of the consumers. But competent and successful are two very, very different things. And if you want to be successful, you need to use that continuing education requirement to develop an area of specialization that you can become known for, that'll help make you economically successful as well. And so that's one of the really important pieces of that. And then as we know, and where the NCAA has new standards for the strength and conditioning coaches employed in member institutions, some of the skills are considered perishable, the first aid, CPR, AED, and things. And so you want to make sure that you stay current on those, so that they're more of a reflex response when they're necessary, than something that you have to think and consider carefully in a time that may be pressurized.
I want to explore that just a little bit more, because the NCCA requirements. So I think it's for our international audience, like, what is the NCAA? I think maybe Graham, if you can provide a little bit of a background of who they are and kind of what they do. And I think wonder if you could explore a little bit further beyond that and talk about, like, when you talk about from a regulatory side, I think when you do that, and then maybe for our individual organizations, how we require continuing education in specific areas. So, for example, some organizations require ethics training as part of their continuing education. I think about NCSF has done that. ACE has done that as well. So maybe we can explore that a little bit. So let's talk about the regulatory part. I think, Graham, maybe we start there. And then maybe as our individual organizations, we can talk about how continuing education has kind of changed over time as part of our continuing competence for our professionals.
Sure. So one of the things in the exercise professional space in most countries is it's not government regulated. It's industry regulated, and they're subject to third-party standards. And I apologize for not explaining who the NCAA is. That is the governing body for collegiate athletics and sports in the United States. And over the past decade, there's been an increasing number of out of competition conditioning related injuries and deaths associated, quite frankly, with underqualified individuals that are working as strength and conditioning coaches in that space. And in response to that, we work collegially at CREP/US reps with the National Athletic Trainers Association and others to establish a set of recommendations for the NCAA for the education, credentialing, and ongoing continuing education for those strength and conditioning coaches employed in the collegiate settings to address those athlete safety issues. And part of that does include those perishable skills around emergency response, climate and environmental concerns, and others. But to a large extent, in most of the world, they're relying on the combination of the exercise professionals, their credentialing organizations, and the academic institutions that support them, and the employers to maintain a consumer-friendly and safe environment by working collaboratively.
Great. And another maybe a round robin of just kind of like how your individual organizations, I don't know, I'm sorry I cut you off, Brian, but
No,
I think
no, no. I just want to add, because sometimes people don't understand the relevance, because they say, you know what, I feel that I'm qualified, and I feel that I'm safe. And when we looked at kind of to continue what Graham was saying, when we first initiated this process, when the NCAA came to us, one of the first things I did was I went and looked up all of the deaths that were associated with football, and they were non-contact related. And then we went into the register and back, kind of backdated things, and found that out of all of the different individuals who were involved with the exertional deaths, which is usually generally overheating, not one of them had proper credentialing. So maybe they played football and maybe they lifted weights, but that doesn't make you a strength and conditioning coach. And in all those cases, kind of to Graham's point of the perishables, they did not manage the situation properly and a person died. So when you think about it from this perspective, your job is to provide safety and effectiveness within your performance training, and you killed a person. Well, that's literally the opposite of correct. So I think it's really important that people do recognize that people get hurt and people die. In the reports from UNC that we see over the last 20 years, it's an average of 87 deaths per year across the high school and college. You just don't hear about them because they settle out of court. So I just wanted to underscore how sometimes important it is when we look at, physical activity for health. Sometimes physical activity in extreme conditions is not healthy. And so you need to be competent and have those emergency readiness components, know what to do with, heat, illness, and related. So that's why you have to do CPR, with the renewals. That's why basic life support, those different types of things are involved.
Well, and I think the important thing, because that's kind of a microcosm of what the whole purpose of the registry system and portability system is that we do have those aspirations and that desire to align with healthcare in each country, and to really provide that leadership, that expertise, those programs at the intersection of clinic and community for people that are looking to improve or maintain their health or performance. And it's critically important when you're talking about referring professionals, payers, and government, that you can identify those individuals which are the most appropriately qualified individuals to deliver the services. And in national registration and international portability to ensure that there's access to a qualified workforce are critical components. It's a cornerstone of the viability for the exercise professionals and the organizations that hire them.
So as we're kind of getting closer to their question and answer, I do want to remind our audience to use the Q&A function to ask any questions you have. I'd love to be able to answer those at the end. And so I guess I would love to be able to hear from each organization talking about their continuing education requirements for their credentials. And I'm thinking about this in like two different buckets. And one bucket is opportunities to minimize risk in areas that are related to gross negligence. Here's what's expected of standards of practice, things like that. It's just like, how do you maintain your knowledge and skill in those particular areas? And then maybe the other bucket talking about things like professional standards, kind of terms of like things like beyond gross negligence, about maybe poor behavior. And so how have your individual organizations addressed that? And I think maybe we'll start with Brian.
So the NCSF functions, it's continuing education in buckets related to the domains that are assigned by the job task analysis. And that's pretty consistent across the board with all the respective organizations. There's just some nuances between the differences. We do require professional standards and ethics. So you have to have one or two continuing education units related to that, and we build in components that, to Graham's point, that are kind of leveling up people so that they're constantly allocating time for new skill development and a build or stack on previous competencies. So when we did the mapping, as I mentioned before, the number of hours is pretty consistent, whereas the NSCA might take 3 years to do it, but the hours per year are consistent with ACE and the NCSF and ACSM. So the nuances between the different organizations on who they partnered with per se for their continuing education. Some organizations have their own education departments, others use external. And the way that works is the external educators will provide the student learning outcomes and programmatic outcomes and their actual education package to the organization. The organization will assign a contact hour aspect to it. And that allows for professionals to get different areas of coverage where they want to impact their instruction. Is that what you're looking for, Francis?
Yeah, I think there's I know within the American College of Sports Medicine, for example, we have our split in requiring education and recommending it based on kind of the job task analysis. Like, here are the different areas of domains or content areas that are important. You have to have a diverse level of education there. We also looked at, because I think as part of US Reps, we check, the news outlets to see if there's any sort of lawsuits that are actively going, and a lot of the lawsuits that we're seeing are related to poor behavior, and so in response to that, ACSM is now adding in an ethics requirement as well, starting in 2027. So you're required to do that in order to address that. How important not only are you skillful enough to do your job, but you're continuing to stay ethical in your practice. I don't know if Greg or Graham want to answer that as well.
Before you chime in, I just want to say each of the organizations has a respective committee that's assigned to the practice standards and professionalism. So if there are bad actors, those committees are joined to deal with the situation.
Oh, he just cut off their hands. I'm just kidding. No, what we do. So the NSCA has a foreign affiliate program. It's very different compared to most. It's more of a licensing agreement as opposed to a franchise or a for corporate model, and the result provides greater flexibility in its operations and localization. That's a key term. Localization of our certification standards and continuing education requirements. Because it's going to be different. For example, in Madrid, in Spain, they're requiring degrees for personal trainers, and the NSCA Spain would create a pathway for the students to obtain, not only obtain their degrees, but also the CSCS certification is a practical component after they graduate. And then, of course, some continuing education in order to maintain that. And then, of course, in Japan, they require practical before obtaining their certification. So it's really dependent on the country. But one of the things that we've been trying to do is having a foreign affiliate program in order to meet the local demands of that country. When I say local, each country's requirements, because it's very different per country.
You want to add anything else to that, Graham?
Yeah, I think that probably just a couple things on that is we mirror the modeling that you and Brian and Greg have described. So we have a 2-year renewal cycle. There's 10 hours per year that's required for a total of 20 hours. It has to be within the scope of practice for the professional job role. We do have that ethics requirement, as you've described, that you're preparing to add, and that Brian has in place as well, because most of what we see isn't that individuals aren't technically proficient or acting outside of their scope. It's that that their behavior falls short of what's expected. And our ethics requirement is not just the what you do and what you don't do. We include the EDI areas, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Those courses are eligible for that as well. I think in the construct of our international portability, one of the things that's really important is that the globe has an amazing assortment of continuing education and training that's available for exercise professionals, and the master trainers for all these organizations and the authors of the content are subject to these kind of semi-disparate education and credentialing requirements. And using the portability matrix helps us evaluate those individuals that are seeking to provide the education that is consumed by ACE and other professionals, so that we know that they understand what our scope of practice is and things like that, and can actually approve them as either the author or the presenter of that content. So we rely on the international registry system to assist us with understanding who from other countries that's a master trainer is qualified. And for those global providers, having that education and training that's coming from their country, and then layering a US-based credible certification on top of that is really the optimum thing that we're looking for.
Awesome. And so I'm gonna final question before we go into the question and answer section, if that's okay. Maybe we'll start with Tom on this one. Is what resources are available for professionals that are looking for guidance in navigating the international pathways? IC Reps is a great example of kind of the resources of international portability. So what resources, if I'm like, gosh, I want to go from the United States to Australia, or Australia, United States, or whatever those whatever countries we're looking to do, where can they look, and kind of and resources can they find?
Yeah, thanks, Francis. I think the first place I'd recommend is icreps.org. And if you look at our members list, which includes CREP and US reps, of course, you'll see each organization that specializes, that has a register in that country. And they're all eager. If you were going to Australia, AusActive is eager to help you understand portability from the US. If you're going to New Zealand, Exercise New Zealand. If you're going to UK, then SIMSPA is going to be eager. They have professionals just waiting to talk with you, and are very knowledgeable, particularly with the US, because a lot of folks come from the US. So that's really the first place would be icreps.org. Folks can also reach out to me, and I can connect as best I can around the globe. But I know in the US reps is going to also have resources and personnel ready to help with folks. So you don't have to navigate these waters by yourself. That's a big takeaway, that people are here to help you navigate this really difficult, these difficult waters between countries.
So maybe I can ask this to Brian on this one. Thank you for that. Maybe I can ask this one to Brian on this one, is because you're wearing your IC Reps hat on. Say if I'm based in India and I want to work in the United States, you're on one register and you want to port from say the register in India to a register in the United States. Is that all you need to do in order to work from India to the OS? And are there other requirements that you have to do beyond just the reciprocity of those registers?
Yeah, so we work under agreements to make sure that no one's kind of sneaking through the system or circumventing the process. So in the case of your India situation, you would need to go to an accredited training provider and get your qualification, whether it's group exercise or personal trainer. Let's say you're a personal trainer, and then you would enter into Reps India. At that point, you are within the registration system, but you are not qualified to get into the United States yet, because the US requires a member certification. So we do recognize that you've done the education, we recognize you've done the practical components that are necessary, but then you just go to US Reps, is what we tell them, and select from whatever organization that resonates most with you. In some cases, our respective organizations have provided the training provider with the opportunity to educate the individual through the normal processes, plus the certification education. And most of us offer, well, actually all of us offer international certification opportunities. And so if they're in Reps India, they get a US certification, they move to the US, they can be registered.
Yeah, and that assumes that you have all the appropriate visas, et cetera, sponsors if that's required, or things like that as well. So the certifications,
Yeah,
and
that's the additional
the
layer.
other part.
Yeah. Now, if you wanted to go to India and you have, your US Reps qualification, you can port directly in there as long as you can demonstrate that you've done your practical assessment. If you haven't done your practical assessment, you would go to India, and they have training providers who do a 1-day assessment to show your competencies in basic trading instruction. So we have it, both ways for each of the different countries. And in some cases, there are countries that are still kind of catching up. So for instance, Canada is in its final mapping sequence across the global standards. And once those things have been approved by our third party assessors to make sure that everything is consistent with the global matrix, then they'll be added into the portability sequence with regards to the different countries that have recognition. And as Tom said, you can just go onto icreps.org and go to put in one country, and it shows you what you have to do for the next country.
Great. So we're in the Q&A section. Again, for our audience, please ask any questions that you have, and we'll love to be able to get to them. But maybe we can start off with one of the questions is, are there any emerging trends or developments in the fitness industry that you'll believe will have significant impact on international portability? And so maybe it's a round robin on this.
I'll start. So the register system in the US has very specific roles. We have the group exercise instructor, the personal trainer, strength and conditioning, the clinical position, whether a medical exercise specialist or an exercise physiologist. And we formerly had Pilates. In other register systems, they oftentimes are mainly like a group exercise, a aqua instructor, gym instructor, which is the entry level. Then they have personal trainers, potentially level 1, level 2. And then in some cases, they will also have the addition of yoga and Pilates. And so while we've had Pilates, we have not had yoga, but I see that as the most, and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, the kind of the most growing element as it relates to the specific role. And in many cases, they're utilizing the accreditation bodies from the United States to underpin those standards. So there have been job task analysis that have been completed, and then the standards are being set. But right now, if you go to the global matrix, you won't see, for instance, yoga in there with the standards specifically.
Anybody else?
I think one area that's really changing is going to be around the continuing education, moving those countries that have it as a recommendation to a requirement. It creates a more robust registration system. I think within the EU and some other countries, they are looking at those competency-based exams, and that's really the transition from being an occupation to or vocation, as they would describe it in some, to a profession. They're looking to have a little bit more vigorous teeth in terms of the opportunity to exclude unqualified individuals or individuals that act outside of the scope. I think probably the one piece of advice that I would have for people around portability is do your homework in advance. I think for the most part, it's really easy if you build a plan around what you need to take care of all of those things in advance of your arrival. And certainly our CREP member organizations and CREP, and as Tom indicated, the registers in other countries are willing to go out of their way to help you create that plan so that you can be successful right from the get-go.
I agree. And I think one of the things is especially the discussions with some of our international strategic partners, I think within the college, just understanding beyond certification and think about workforce development and the components of the workforce development, and thinking about it as a system. From a systems-based approach, I think that's been something that's been very helpful for our discussions with our international partners. It's like, look, there's multiple components of this that are there, and especially like terminology is really important. How you prepare, how do you independently assess for competency, your continuing education and registration. Each of those parts, when we're thinking about that as a system, all 4 components play a specific role, and I think a lot of the times those are used interchangeably. And they're like, no, that's not really how that is. These are the particular pieces of competency. This is how you assess it. This is how you continue to be competent in the field. And then what is the way that we can at least be similar to comparable professions that are out there, so we can talk about the same component. So one more question, unless anybody else wanted to add looks
Well,
like.
Francis, I would just
Yeah, please.
add, I think an emerging trend is around the role of the fitness professional within the healthcare
Mm-hmm.
system.
Mm-hmm.
And as
Mm-hmm.
we're developing that in the United States, and other countries are trying to figure that as well, because we're not alone in the US with our issues around chronic disease and mental health and all the various physical maladies associated with inactivity. So as in the United States, as we're developing this role for the exercise professional within the healthcare teams, other countries in the UK, for example, where they have the National Health Service, how can you be portable from the US into the UK and still play a significant role, a meaningful role up to the top of your abilities over another country? So I think that's where registration will play a really significant and important role in the next, decade or so, as several countries are trying to figure out how to leverage this incredible power of physical activity and the expertise that exercise professionals can bring to patients.
No,
Yeah,
that's
it's a really good point, Tom. And the one thing that we see consistently is the registration process aligns with the allied health fields. So there's a big difference between certification and registration because there's a lot of different stamps out there that say you're certified in something, but we have a specificity, recognized by the Department of Labor for the specific job roles, and they've been vetted against a common standard. So that's what we see in the allied health fields, and we're being consistent in that manner.
awesome. So I think last 5 minutes, I think maybe one more question for you all, maybe you can just describe it from as your individual organizations, either individual organizations or as US reps, or IC reps. What do you think the professional associations and industry organizations should play in supporting professionals' efforts to align themselves with global professional standards?
Well, let me start off with the kind of the broader concept, and I'm going to put a US reps hat on here. One of the things that, as the team here knows, is we're putting together a task force of experts from the different areas so that we have input from the different stakeholders. And so you have academic individuals who are going to be providing the curriculum and student learning outcomes associated with the preparations for certification. You have the employers that are going to look for the qualifications that come out that are aligned with the different certifications. You have policymakers that are, consistently looking at the regulatory aspects and where we might fit in there. And so, we're trying to account for all the different stakeholders related to the profession at the US reps level.
So I guess for our organization, I'm going to put my ACSM hat on and then kind of thinking about it from the US rep side. I think for us, it's that as we're, to Tom's point, is just like trying to join our professionals as part of healthcare to meet the same standard that the other adjacent health occupations meet. So whether it's programmatic accreditation in order to prepare students or candidates adequately to do the job, I think is one. National board exams is another. To be able to do that, registration standards, et cetera, to be able to get to that point of like, look, we are like to other adjacent health occupations. In order to say like our professionals are uniquely qualified to be a part of the healthcare continuum. And that's across the multiple credentials that we offer as an organization. From US reps, I think that's the part of, I think it's going to be the big shift is the looking at registration more than just certifications, because it combines all of those areas of, gosh, you have to explain all 4 components in order to understand professionalism. But being able to say registration, I think, is just going to be very key as we continue to move efforts ahead of, look, we are similar to other health occupations that are out there or other organizations that are out there, even like the things like engineering. We meet the same standard. And this is how we're uniquely qualified. And this is our position in the industry. We have about 2 minutes left, and love for anybody else wants to chime in on that.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, all of our organizations are really reputable, and we offer a full range of services. And at the end of the day, what Graham said earlier is do your homework, and I interpret that to, the onus is on yourself. Activate your membership, engage with your membership, demand for these, opportunities and standards within your organization that would influence and, assist US reps as well. Have your paperwork and networks ready. But more importantly, no matter how you engage or how you use US reps and so forth, localize your credentials, localize your experiences in that particular marketplace, in that particular country, because if you're going to be working in France, for example, or si vous allez travailler en France, you better speak a little bit of French, for example, because otherwise, speaking the language is one thing, but being relatable, make sure you know who your favorite football team is too in France. So make sure that number one, activate your membership, engage with your membership. These organizations, whether it be ACSM, NFCF, NSCA, whatever, they exist to serve its members, and so use them and understand what that means as an incentive. Being a U.S. rep registered, professional is pretty important and key as a member benefit too, and utilize it. I don't think a lot of the services that we provide are utilized to its maximum. So
That's a really good point, Greg. I don't think everybody knows that our respective organizations voluntarily pay for them to be on the registration system. So there's no cost to the certificate at all. These organizations front the, all the resources that are necessary to keep this thing alive.
Well, and that's about creating the best possible current and future career opportunities for our shared professionals,
Great. Thank you very much.
domestically or internationally.
We are at the top of the hour. Thank you all for joining this webinar. Thank you all to our panelists for your tremendous insights. The recording will be available for you all to read or watch, and then we'll go from there. Really appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next webinar with US reps. Thank you all. Take care.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
arigato.
Everybody.